The year is 1930, and Shanghai is a city of contradictions. Towering European-style buildings line the Bund, their neon lights glowing over the Huangpu River, while just a few streets away, the air is thick with opium smoke, sweat, and the stench of desperation. The city is divided. Foreign businessmen control the banks, corrupt officials control the laws, and the gangs control everything else. But no gang is more powerful, more feared than the Green Gang. And at the top of this criminal empire, sitting like an emperor in the shadows, is one man, Du Yuesheng. He's not just another gangster. He's the king of Shanghai's underworld. He controls the opium trade, the gambling houses, and the brothels, pulling in millions of dollars while the city spirals into addiction and violence. Politicians fear him. The police answer to him, and those who dare to challenge him simply disappear. Du didn't just build an empire. He rewrote the rules of organized crime. Unlike the bloodthirsty warlords and reckless criminals who came before him, Du was patient, strategic, and ruthless. He didn't just use violence to stay in power. He used business deals, political connections, and cold, calculated betrayal. He transformed the Green Gang from a street-level criminal organization into a multi-million-dollar empire that stretched across China, Southeast Asia, and beyond. And yet, like all men who climb too high, his fall would be just as brutal as his rise. His story is one of power, crime, and ambition taken to its most extreme levels. He wasn't just a crime boss. He was the architect of a system that would define Shanghai's criminal underworld for decades. This is the story of Du Yuesheng, the opium king, the master manipulator, and the crime lord who ruled Shanghai like a godfather. Welcome to EW True Crime Confessions, where we expose the most dangerous and untold stories of history's most powerful criminals. Today, we uncover the man who turned crime into an empire, and an empire into legend. Du Yuesheng was not born into power, wealth, or privilege. He was born in 1888 in rural China, in a world far removed from the bustling, chaotic streets of Shanghai that he would one day rule. His early life was marked by poverty, struggle, and desperation. His father died when he was still a child, leaving the family with nothing. His mother, unable to support him, sent him away to live with relatives. There was no education, no future, no opportunities, just survival. As a teenager, Du made his way to Shanghai, the city that would make him, shape him, and ultimately define his legacy. At the time, Shanghai was a city of foreign influence, corrupt politics, and ruthless ambition. The British, French, and Americans controlled the financial sectors, while Chinese warlords and gangsters ruled the streets. If a man wanted power, he had two choices: align himself with the government, or carve his own path through the underworld. Du arrived in Shanghai with nothing, no money, no family, no formal education. He found work wherever he could, but he was not content to remain a street vendor or a laborer. He was observant. He watched how men moved, how deals were made, how power was taken. He learned that violence alone wasn't enough to survive in Shanghai. You needed intelligence, patience, and connections. It wasn't long before he caught the attention of Huang Jinrong, a high-ranking member of the Green Gang, one of the most powerful crime syndicates in China. Huang saw something in Du, a sharp mind, a hunger for power, and an ability to manipulate people. Under Huang's guidance, Du was introduced to the inner workings of Shanghai's criminal underworld. Protection rackets, opium smuggling, gambling, and the delicate balance between bribery and force. Unlike other gangsters who relied solely on brute force, Du understood that real power came from influence. He started to build relationships, not just with criminals but with politicians, police chiefs, and businessmen. He learned to use money as a weapon, ensuring that the right people were loyal to him, not the government. By the 1920s, Du Yuesheng was no longer just a gangster. He was one of the most powerful men in Shanghai. He had risen through the ranks of the Green Gang, eventually becoming the undisputed leader. His control extended far beyond the criminal underworld. He had judges, military officers, and government officials on his payroll. If a businessman wanted to operate in Shanghai, he needed Du's permission. If a politician wanted to be elected, he needed Du's money. If the police wanted to arrest someone, they needed to check with Du first. He wasn't just feared. He was respected, even admired. His influence was so great that even Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the nationalist government, relied on him. When the nationalists wanted to purge communist sympathizers from Shanghai, it was Du Yuesheng's gang that carried out the assassinations. He was a crime boss, a political enforcer, and a businessman all at once. What made Du truly dangerous was his ability to adapt. He didn't just kill his enemies, he outmaneuvered them. He understood that violence alone could win battles, but strategy won wars. He used charity to build goodwill, investing in public works and funding schools. To the poor, he was seen as a generous benefactor, a man who had risen from nothing and now gave back. To the wealthy elite, he was a necessary evil, a man who kept order in a city that would otherwise descend into chaos. But beneath the public image, Du was a ruthless and calculating mastermind. He controlled Shanghai's opium trade, one of the most profitable and destructive businesses in the world. He ruled through fear, bribery, and loyalty, ensuring that no one could challenge him without facing severe consequences. By the 1930s, Du Yuesheng was at the height of his power. He had everything he had ever wanted: money, influence, and absolute control. But as history has shown time and time again, no empire lasts forever. Du Yuesheng's criminal empire was unlike anything China had ever seen. While other gangsters relied on brute force, Du understood that real power came from a combination of money, influence, and calculated violence. He didn't just run an organization, he built a system. At its peak, the Green Gang controlled Shanghai's streets, its businesses, and even its government. Du didn't just profit from crime. He turned crime into a legitimate business operation, so deeply intertwined with Shanghai's economy that it became impossible to separate the legal from the illegal. The foundation of Du's empire was the opium trade. At a time when millions of Chinese were addicted to the drug, Du ensured that he controlled its distribution, its pricing, and its enforcement. His network stretched across China, Southeast Asia, and beyond, moving massive quantities of raw opium from poppy fields in Burma, refining it in secret facilities, and distributing it through thousands of dens across Shanghai. His organization functioned like a corporation, with suppliers, distributors, enforcers, and financial managers, all ensuring that the drug trade remained one of the most profitable businesses in China. But Du's control over the opium trade wasn't just about profit, it was about absolute dominance. He worked closely with French and British authorities in Shanghai's foreign-controlled zones, ensuring that the colonial police turned a blind eye to his operations. Those who tried to operate outside of his control were swiftly eliminated. Opium dealers who refused to buy from the Green Gang were found dead in the streets, their bodies serving as a warning to others. His gambling empire was just as massive. Shanghai's casinos weren't just places for entertainment, they were centers of money laundering, debt collection, and organized crime. Those who lost money and couldn't pay their debts were given a choice: work for the Green Gang or disappear. Some became enforcers, some became smugglers, and others were never seen again. Du didn't just control crime. He controlled the justice system itself. Police officers, judges, and government officials were all on his payroll, ensuring that any case against him or his men was dismissed before it ever reached a courtroom. Those few officers who tried to fight back either accepted bribes, left the city, or ended up floating in the river. Beyond drugs and gambling, Du's empire extended into protection rackets, arms smuggling, and political assassinations. Businesses across Shanghai were forced to pay for green gang protection, a protection they needed only because Du's own men ensured that without it, their shops would be robbed, their shipments stolen, and their employees attacked. His organization functioned like a government within a government, controlling trade, security, and even public services in certain districts. Du's most powerful weapon, however, was his influence over the nationalist government. While many crime bosses avoided politics, Du embraced it. He became a close ally of Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Nationalist Party, using his gang to eliminate communist rivals, intimidate political opponents, and enforce government policies in the most brutal ways possible. In 1927, during the infamous Shanghai Massacre, Du Yuesheng's men played a crucial role in hunting down and executing suspected communists, ensuring that the nationalist government remained in power. His alliance with the nationalists gave him legal cover for his illegal activities. He provided funding, intelligence, and armed support, and in return he was given protection, government contracts, and a level of political influence that no other gangster in China had ever achieved. His name became synonymous with power, and for years he ruled Shanghai like a warlord in a three-piece suit. But power always comes at a cost. Du's greed and ambition continued to grow, and with it, so did his enemies. Rival factions within the Green Gang began to resent his dominance. Foreign governments began pressuring Shanghai to crack down on organized crime, and even within the Nationalist Party, some saw Du as a dangerous liability. By the late 1930s, the world was changing, and even the most powerful crime bosses couldn't escape the coming storm. Shanghai was no longer just a city of crime. It was becoming a battlefield, and Du Yuesheng's empire was about to face its greatest threat. By the late 1930s, Du Yuesheng had built an empire so vast that it seemed indestructible. He controlled the opium trade, gambling, extortion, and even the city's political landscape. His alliance with the nationalist government ensured that he remained untouchable, his businesses thrived, and his enemies vanished without a trace. But power is never permanent. The forces that had once protected him were now beginning to turn against him, and soon the empire he had spent decades building would begin to crumble beneath him. Shanghai had always been a city of shifting allegiances, but by the late 1930s, the balance of power was changing faster than anyone could control. The growing tensions between China and Japan were reaching their peak, and in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War erupted, turning Shanghai into a war zone. The once thriving metropolis, where Du's gang had operated openly and fearlessly, was now being bombed, invaded, and occupied by foreign forces. The Japanese army moved in, dismantling everything in its path, and for the first time in his life, Du Yuesheng faced an enemy he could not bribe, threaten, or kill. As the Japanese took control of Shanghai, Du realized that his time in the city was over. His influence with the nationalists was no longer enough to protect him, and his vast criminal empire was now at risk of being taken over by the enemy. He knew that staying in Shanghai meant certain death, so he made the only decision he could. He fled. Leaving behind a city he once ruled, Du escaped to Hong Kong, taking as much of his fortune as he could with him. It was a strategic retreat, a temporary exile that he hoped would allow him to regain his power once the war ended. But nothing about war is predictable, and nothing about exile is temporary when the world around you is collapsing. As the war raged on, Du tried to rebuild his influence from the shadows, but it was no longer the same. His power had always come from controlling Shanghai, from the streets, the police, and the corrupt officials who owed him their loyalty. Now, in exile, he was a man without a city, a crime lord without a kingdom. He continued to support the nationalist cause, funneling money and resources into Chiang Kai-shek's war efforts, hoping that once the Japanese were defeated, he could return to Shanghai and reclaim his empire. But war has a way of reshaping everything, and when the conflict ended, Shanghai was no longer the same city he had once ruled. In 1949, the Communists, led by Mao Zedong, took control of China, forcing the nationalists to retreat to Taiwan. The rise of the Communist Party meant the end of organized crime as it had existed under Du's reign. The new government launched an aggressive crackdown on corruption, crime, and the remnants of the old regime, wiping out entire syndicates and executing those who had once thrived under nationalist rule. Du knew he could never return. The world he had built no longer existed. His power, his influence, his vast criminal empire, all of it was gone. The communists saw him not as a businessman, not even as a criminal, but as a symbol of everything they wanted to destroy. If he set foot in Shanghai, his fate would be sealed. With no home left in China, Du fled once again, this time to Taiwan, where he lived under the protection of Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government in exile. He had gone from Shanghai's most powerful crime lord to a fugitive, a man whose empire had collapsed beneath him. In Taiwan, he lived out his days in luxury, but without the power he once commanded. He still had money, still had connections, but he was no longer the untouchable king of Shanghai's underworld. The streets he once ruled belonged to someone else now. The government he once controlled had been dismantled, and the empire he had spent a lifetime building was nothing more than a memory. In 1951, Du Yuesheng died of illness, far from the city he had once dominated. He had escaped execution, escaped capture, escaped justice. But he could not escape time, exile, and the reality that no criminal empire lasts forever. Du Yuesheng was not just a crime boss. He was a master manipulator, a strategist, and a man who understood power in ways that few ever could. Unlike many gangsters who relied purely on violence, Du built an empire that thrived on influence, psychological control, and strategic alliances. His ability to balance brutality with diplomacy made him one of the most feared yet respected figures in China's criminal underworld. At his core, Du Yuesheng was a calculating opportunist. He never acted impulsively, never let emotions cloud his decisions, and always ensured that his power was built on both fear and necessity. He knew that raw violence alone could make someone feared, but it could never make someone indispensable. That's what set him apart. He made himself a figure that the city, the government, and even his enemies needed in order to maintain order. By embedding himself within the very foundations of Shanghai's power structure, he made sure that removing him would cause more problems than keeping him in power. Unlike traditional crime lords who focused solely on criminal operations, Du was a businessman at heart. His ability to treat illegal enterprises as legitimate industries allowed him to transform crime into a structured economy. His opium trade wasn't just about selling drugs. It was about controlling supply chains, setting prices, and ensuring stability in the market. He approached racketeering and extortion like corporate negotiations, ensuring that those who paid for his protection saw some benefit beyond just avoiding violence. What made Du particularly dangerous was his understanding of human psychology. He knew exactly who to intimidate, who to bribe, and who to kill. He understood that people weren't just motivated by fear. They were also driven by greed, loyalty, and the desire for security. By playing on these emotions, he secured unwavering loyalty from his allies and absolute obedience from his subordinates. His enforcers didn't just follow orders out of fear. They believed that serving Du Yuesheng was the best path to success and survival. Du's ability to switch between brutality and diplomacy was one of his greatest strengths. He could order the execution of a rival in the morning and attend a charity event in the evening, smiling alongside politicians and businessmen. This duality made him unpredictable. People never knew if they would be met with generosity or violence. This uncertainty gave him an aura of untouchability. Few dared to cross him because they didn't know what kind of response they would receive. His alliance with Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government further cemented his power, but it also revealed another layer of his psychological makeup. He wasn't just a gangster. He saw himself as a statesman. His involvement in political assassinations and counter-communist operations showed that he believed his actions were justified, that he was more than just a crime lord. He was a man shaping the future of China. But like all powerful figures, Du had one fatal flaw: overconfidence. His belief that he could manipulate any situation, control any force, and maintain his power indefinitely blinded him to the reality that no empire lasts forever. He underestimated how quickly political landscapes could shift, how fragile alliances truly were, and how even the most powerful men could be replaced. In the end, Du Yuesheng was not brought down by an enemy, not taken out by a rival, and not even executed by the state. He was defeated by time, changing tides, and the rise of a system that had no place for men like him. His mind, once his greatest weapon, could not save him from the inevitable fall that comes for all men who build their power on corruption and crime. Du Yuesheng's life was a testament to the raw power of ambition, intelligence, and ruthlessness. He was a man who rose from nothing, took control of one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in history, and ruled Shanghai with an iron grip. He built a criminal empire that blurred the lines between crime, business, and politics, ensuring that his influence extended far beyond the underworld. But in the end, like all men who built their power on fear and corruption, his empire collapsed. His death in 1951 was not violent. There was no dramatic execution, no final battle against law enforcement or rival gangs. Instead, he died in exile, far from the city he had once ruled, a relic of a past that no longer existed. The man who had once controlled Shanghai's opium trade, gambling rings, and political assassinations spent his final years watching the world move on without him. The city he had once called his kingdom had changed forever, now under the rule of a new government that had no tolerance for men like him. But even though his empire was gone, his legacy endured. The methods he pioneered, organized crime as a business, political corruption as a tool, and strategic manipulation as a means to power, would be studied and replicated by crime syndicates around the world. His ability to balance violence with diplomacy, to operate both inside and outside the law, set the foundation for the modern criminal enterprises that followed. His story serves as a warning and a lesson. Power built on crime is never permanent. Influence gained through fear is never absolute. And no empire, no matter how carefully constructed, can withstand the test of time. Du Yuesheng ruled Shanghai like a king, but in the end, he died like a man who had lost everything. Even today, his name lingers in history, not as a hero, but as a symbol of how far ambition can take a man, and how quickly it can all be taken away. His rise was legendary. His fall was inevitable. This was the story of Du Yuesheng, the crime lord who ruled Shanghai and lost it all. If you found this story fascinating, Subscribe to Ewu True Crime Confessions for more deep dives into history's most powerful criminals. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Because sometimes the most dangerous men aren't the ones in prison. They're the ones who rewrite the rules of power.